Welcome to today's webinar, everybody. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about making NHS websites accessible. We're also going to be speaking a little bit about WCAG 2.2 as well. So on today's agenda, we're going to have a quick intro to me, just so you know who I am and I'm not a complete stranger. And then we'll go ahead and hop into the meat of it. So we're going to be looking at how accessible your websites are right now, some of the most common accessibility challenges that you guys are facing, and also how to fix them. We're going to be taking a look at what's coming later this year with WCAG 2.2 when that comes out. And then we'll probably have a bit of time at the end for a Q&A, but do feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. We'll just kind of answer them all at the end. I know it's easier to ask questions as they come to you, so do feel free to go ahead and do that. Also, as a quick primer, it's not intended to be a super technical webinar. So we're not going to be looking at like in-depth code or super developer-y stuff. So should be quite beginner friendly, which is all good. So let's hop in. So who am I? My name's Adam Womersley, and I'm the written and audio content creator here at Silktide. For those who can't see me or just don't want to, I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing my Silktide hoodie to stay warm, and now that it's super cold. I've been here at Silktide since May, but I've been working in various marketing roles across content and management since 2015. So that's enough about me. Let's go ahead and dive in. Before we look at the actual state of your websites and all the accessibility scorings and stuff, I just want to get a good sense of how you think that you're doing when it comes to web accessibility right now. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a quick poll. Please do answer it if you can. There's no right or wrong answers here, obviously, but it'd just be really helpful to get a good sense of that sort of stuff. Yeah, so, predictably, I would have thought this. Most people are saying it could be better. I think that's always going to be the case, right? People always kind of, think that they can do a little bit better. So that's all good. Not very accessible and very accessible are, near about the same. So that's pretty interesting. Cool, right? I mean, that's all good. I'm going to end that there. I know that's quite fast, but hopefully that's all good. Magic. Right, move that out of the way. Cool. So we're going to be looking at some data from the Silktide Index. If you don't know what the Silktide Index is, it's just the league table showing how organizations across various different industries all compare for website accessibility. So it works using Silktide's automated web testing software. So we'll test and score websites against WCAG 2.1, which is the globally recognized standards for web accessibility. Speaking of which, it's going to be a range of accessibility in here in terms of what people know. So WCAG might be new to you, and it might just sound like a random word that I've just made up. So what is it, right? Well, WCAG stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which kind of makes it make a little bit more sense as to what it is. So it basically provides a universal standard for website accessibility. You may have also heard of WCAG 2.0 and WCAG 2.1 and WCAG 2.2 because I've just mentioned it and it's in the title of the webinar. So we're going to be speaking about that later. But what's the difference here? Well, WCAG 2.1 is the latest released standard. So it includes things like checks for mobile devices and stuff. Whereas WCAG 2.2, it kind of predates a lot of smartphones. So a lot of these checks were added in later with the latest version, which was WCAG 2.2. So what's all this about WCAG 2.2? Well, 2.2 standards, they're currently being worked on. They're currently in draft. There's a few updates and some new things being added, and it's expected to release later this year. So it can get a little bit more complex when it comes to WCAG, though. So hopefully I won't lose you here. But when it comes to accessibility checks within WCAG standards, they're often broken down into 3 levels of compliance. You've got level A, AA, and AAA. And the easiest way to think about this is that level A are things that you must do, AA are things that you should do, and AAA are things that you should aspire to do. So if we're talking like the most common, the common one to aim for, or what's used for a lot of legal requirements for web accessibility, then most often we're going to be looking at WCAG 2.1 AA. Cool. Okay, so we know a bit about WCAG now. Let's go ahead and move on. I know it was a kind of quick overview, but we have got a bunch of other resources on our website if you want to find out a little bit more about that. But let's jump into like the scores of your websites. So how do your websites look when it comes to accessibility? Well, They look okay. So the Silk Tide Index, where we get all this data from, it gives us an accessibility score out of 100 based on how accessible that website is to WCAG 2.1 AA, as I just mentioned. And from the sites that we tested, the average score out of 100 was, drumroll, 68.7. So if we compare this with the average accessibility scores across other sectors, we can see UK councils, police forces, and universities. They've got slightly higher average scores. Now, don't panic. All it shows is that there's a really great opportunity here to improve, and that's exactly what we're here for. And hopefully, you'll be able to take some stuff from this webinar, and that'll help you get there in no time at all. Now, 68.7, it is just the average score. Some websites are actually doing a really, really fantastic job. And in fact, the highest accessibility score is 88, which is really good. So it might not be as bad as it sounds for you. So that means, if you're doing that well, that means job done. You can put your feet up and not have to worry about accessibility, right? Well, not quite. There's still a lot of areas where accessibility can and should and really needs to be improved. And on top of that, WCAG 2.2, as I mentioned, it's on the horizon. It's coming later this year. And there's quite a few things in that which are worth preparing for. So let's take a look now at some of the actual accessibility issues, very specifically the issues that you guys are facing on NHS websites. So again, this data is taken from the Silk Tide Index. I've taken all of that data and I've just put it into this more user-friendly top 10 list. There's a few things in here which are pretty easy and self-explanatory. A few others are a little bit more complex. But before we kind of start going through these, I did say it wasn't going to be a technical webinar, so I'm going to go ahead and strike off those last two. So it's more of a top 8 list. But having said that, we don't really have a lot of time. We've got to cover a lot of stuff today, and I'm sure you don't want to hear me go on too long. So I'm going to also just cover the top 5. So we've got, like I say, loads to cover. And in fact, with everything that's in this list, we could write a whole book about it. And that's what we did do. If you've not read this already, you can. It's a free ebook that you can get from our website. It's super beginner friendly. So yeah, you can go ahead and check that out if you haven't already. And just on this, by the way, there are going to be quite a few links throughout this webinar. Don't worry about transcribing them. I've been there. I've done that. It's a nightmare. We will be sharing the slides with you after the session. So don't worry about scribbling these down. So I just want to establish a brief understanding of what a screen reader is. I'm going to be talking about screen readers quite a bit. So a screen reader is a form of assistive technology that simply reads out the web page content to you. So for users who are blind, perhaps they have low vision, or even users with cognitive disabilities, these screen readers are really essential when it comes to browsing the web. So what's smart about them as well is they'll actually read some like hidden information about certain web page elements to kind of further describe what it is, its purpose, and the context around it. So alt text is a really perfect example of that. I've got a screenshot up on screen now where there's a mock-up of a website on the right-hand side, and we're actually focusing on the T-shirt there. And a screen reader would actually read out the alt text and let us know that it's an image. So it would read T-shirt image. So that's the sort of stuff which a screen reader is really good for. It's actually really easy to test. It's really easy to experiment with a screen reader and find a bunch of accessibility issues on your website. We do have a free Chrome plugin. You can download this and just kind of listen to how your website sounds by hitting tab a few times. So just a nice and easy thing to test out. So if you're anything like me, I can be quite impatient. If I'm reading a website and I'm reading website content, I don't want to read the whole thing. Normally I'm going there for a very specific reason. So I'll find what I need and then I'll just go ahead and I'll move on. I'm a big skim reader. And for users that are using screen readers, well, they're no different. They don't want to have to wait and listen through, all of the content that's irrelevant to them just to find out the one link or the one place where they want to go to. And so the way that they do that is they find a way to kind of skim read in a similar sort of way. And they do that because screen readers can skip between certain like page elements on the screen. So they could, for example, skip between the headings on the page or the headers. Or they could skip between the links. So these screenshots I've just shown, they're from Yoast's websites. I've got the headings and the links highlighted there to kind of help demonstrate what's going to be read out to users when they're skipping between those pieces of content. So it really just helps them find what they want faster instead of having to listen to every single word above that on the page. So, right, we get it. So let's jump to our first point on the list, which is same link for different destinations. This is the accessibility issue that we looked at, our first point on that top 5 list. And this is actually a huge issue for NHS websites. 99.51% of the sites that we tested suffer from this issue. So it's pretty common. So I've got some paragraphs up on screen now, and there's some links dotted throughout. The content here doesn't really matter, so don't bother reading it. But what's important is that link text is this very specific text that you click on to follow a link. Most often it's going to be in a different color. It's going to be underlined, just like in this example here with the yellow text. And that's essentially what link text is, right? So if we're using something like a screen reader, and we don't want to read the whole content, then we're probably just going to skip between the links so we find exactly what we need faster. The problem is a screen reader is going to read out the content like this. It would read out, click here, here, read more, click here. And so you can instantly see why this causes a problem, because we have no idea where these links lead to, right? They could literally link to anywhere. As another demonstration, here's a quick game, right? We've got some link text on the left-hand side and some search engines that they link to on the right-hand side. And the game is to try and match the correct link text to the correct search engine that they link to. And it's completely impossible before anyone tries, unless you just make a very lucky guess. It's completely impossible because the link text is so non-descriptive, it's used multiple times, and it can literally link to anywhere. And that's the kind of issue that we're facing here. Here is the answers in case anyone actually guessed. We get that using non-descriptive and very generic link text multiple times to linking to very different places can be super unclear. But how do we fix it? What's the solution here? Well, first off, let's throw away the words click here and read more, learn more is another example. All of these kind of words, that they're absolutely rubbish for links. They're used all the time. You know, I am guilty of this in the past as well. I use them a lot, and you know, I'm sure you have. But in order to fix this, you know, my preferred solution is just to make the link text super clear in terms of where it's linking to. So it's just way clearer to everyone, with or without disabilities. It's better for SEO, and it's not that difficult. Let's look at an example, right? So let's take this sentence. Vaccinations can be organized fortnightly during local vaccination center closures. Read more. So where does this read more link take us? Does it take us to information about fortnightly vaccinations? Does it take us to information on vaccination center closures, to information about both? It's really hard to say. Now look at this sentence. Vaccinations can be organized fortnightly during local vaccination center closures. Read more about your local vaccination center availability. So by making this link text super clear, you can very easily tell where this link is going to take you. It can easily be understood by absolutely everyone. And obviously that's going to be read out by screen readers as well, right? So it's just super clear. Now, you might be looking at this and thinking the exact same as what I've thought in the past, which is, but that makes the link too long. We want it to be short and pretty. And that's where there is another solution. And that is using ARIA attributes. Now, this can get a bit technical, but you know, I'll kind of make it super user friendly. But very similar to how alt text describes an image on a website. An ARIA attribute is a kind of like a hidden attribute behind a link that's going to describe where that link goes to. So looking at the same example as before, in that bottom one there, we have the exact same text, but crucially, the text in square brackets there is a hidden ARIA attribute. So it's not visible. It's not going to be, you know, actually within the paragraph itself. But when a screen reader gets to it, it's going to read more about your local vaccination center availability. So it makes it super clear and easy to understand for users who are relying on screen readers. However, the only issue with this is it doesn't actually fix the issue that it's a really poorly constructed sentence. It's pretty confusing to everybody else. That's where the first solution is my most preferred way of doing things. But yeah, here is another solution too. Cool. So here's some links for further reading. Again, don't worry about transcribing these. Some of these links are super long. I'm going to be sharing the slides with you later on. So So yeah, don't worry about that. Also, a quick reminder, if you do have questions that kind of crop up, I appreciate I might be going through this quite fast. So if there's anything that kind of crops up that you think of, do just drop them into the Q&A section of Zoom. We'll answer them at the end. But yeah, just so you don't forget. Cool. So let's we've got off that first point. Let's move on to PDFs next. I'm not a fan of PDFs. I wrote a blog a while ago about this that you can read on our website, but PDFs just aren't, they're just not very accessible. And I mean, there's a reason why PDFs are always the top challenge when it comes to web accessibility. And in actual fact, 76% of NHS websites do suffer with accessibility issues with PDFs. So as a quick run through, PDFs are essentially just a print screen of your content, right? They can't be edited. They can very easily be shared, and that's fantastic. That's what we want them for. But it doesn't actually contain any content, more of just an image of the content. So because of that, it causes a lot of accessibility challenges. You'll see this if you ever tried to like copy and paste from a PDF, you'll notice that it loses all of its formatting. It might spell stuff wrong. And that's because your computer is trying to guess what each letter is rather than actually pasting content. And while computers are pretty good at guessing, they're not 100% perfect. So if there's no actual content in a PDF, then how can technology like a screen reader, for example, read it? Well, it can't, at least not without a bit of work. But we still use PDFs as well. And why? Because they're very good as a static piece of content that no one can edit. That's the reason why everybody loves them. It's the reason why everybody uses them. And it's also the number one reason that makes them so bad for accessibility. If you ever tried to read a PDF on a mobile device, you'll know exactly what I mean. You have to kind of pinch to zoom in, and then you got to scroll left and right and up and down and read each line one at a time. It's an absolute nightmare. And in WCAG, this is referred to as reflow. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but it's just a horrendous experience. And unfortunately with PDFs, there's just no fix to this. So it's because of that, it doesn't necessarily breach WCAG guidelines, but it's super inaccessible. It's an awful user experience for absolutely everybody. So what do we do about it? Luckily, there are a few things that we can try to do to make PDFs as accessible as possible. One solution is to use software to put PDFs through a process called tagging. It tells the computer what the content is, and it kind of tags that content in a hidden way so that it can be read by technology like a screen reader. And you can do this using software like Adobe Acrobat, but do be warned, it can be pretty complicated. It's a bit of a chore, especially tables. Getting tables in a PDF to be accessible is just the worst. Now we've got a webinar on our website which goes really in depth into just PDFs and making them accessible. So you can go ahead and watch that if you do want a more in-depth look at PDFs very specifically. Another solution is to use software like Darnia. So Darnia is a piece of software. It plugs into Microsoft Office, and that can really help you save time because it will allow you to export like your Word documents as a fully accessible PDF in just a few clicks. So it's definitely worth checking out if you're doing a lot of PDFs, and accessibility for those is a common issue. So we've done some tagging, we've made sure that our PDFs are as accessible as we can possibly make them. But is it enough? As a final potential solution, you could consider making an accessible web page alternative. Now you're probably thinking right now, oh, thanks, Adam. That sounds like a cop-out solution. That's a lot of work. And, I do get it. But unfortunately, there's just, as I said, there's no way to make PDFs 100% accessible whilst keeping them as a PDF. There's just no way. And look, everyone uses PDFs, even us. They're just so good at what they do, but their biggest strength is totally their biggest weakness. And even though they're everywhere, we're probably not going to be getting rid of them anytime soon. So just make sure that you're using software like Darnia or Acrobat. You're going through that tagging process, and if it's something that's really big and really important, then then consider having an alternative like a web page that can be fully accessible. Cool. Again, here's some more links, but we'll swiftly move on from that. So we've ticked off 2. Let's move on to unclear focus states. So if you didn't know, a focus state shows a user what element they currently have selected when they're using keyboard navigation or any alternative to using a mouse. Compare this to a hover state, which is completely different. A hover state is for mouse control. So if you are using a mouse and you hover that mouse over a button or an image, it might change color, it might kind of grow, all sorts of different animations and effects and stuff like that can happen. And it looks really pretty, it looks quite nice, but it is not the same as focus state. Focus state doesn't need to look pretty, it doesn't need to look nice. It just needs to be big, bold, and clear, because the only people who are ever going to see your focus state are the people who actually need to see it, right? So we'll discuss this a little bit more. We're going to be looking at that in terms of what's coming in WCAG 2.2. But just be aware that focus states aren't the same as hover states. They shouldn't have designers all over it, making it look, nice and drop shadowy. They should be big and bold, like the example I've got up on screen now. We've got a video, and we've got a webinar on this as well, so you can go ahead and check those out if you want some further info on that. Next up, and we've already touched on this, scrolling in 2 dimensions. So when I was kind of talking about the PDFs, this is a really good example of that. And so scrolling in 2 dimensions is referred to as reflow in WCAG. So what this essentially means is that whenever you resize a window on your computer or you view a website on a mobile device, the content is resized so it fits the current size better. So it's like responsive websites essentially, but it's all about the content reshuffling and organizing itself. So it should be very clearly legible and visible without the need to scroll left and right and up and down all at the same time. So if, say, for example, you're a user with low vision, right, and you might need to kind of pinch to zoom in on your mobile to read the content. The content should reflow that it appears in a single column, and so you only have to scroll down to read it instead of having to kind of scroll left and right and read one sentence one at a time. Again, we've got some more info on that here that you can go ahead and check out in your spare time if you wanted to. Cool. So we've covered 4. Last up is sufficient text contrast. So this one, it can be quite easy to miss, but it's also quite easy to solve for the most part. Now, this is a big one for your websites. We found that 83% of NHS websites have text without sufficient contrast, right? So what is it? Really, it's about making text as clear and as legible to as many people as possible. So contrast issues can often happen when text is on a colored background or maybe an image, and the text itself doesn't have enough contrast to really stand out from that background. So it can be pretty hard to read. So if I've got some examples up here, right? So we've got white text on a yellow background, and that can be really hard to read even at this size. And then we've got white text on a dark blue background, which is really easy to read, right? So it kind of just shows that if we were someone that suffered with low vision, or if we were colorblind, or maybe even if we just wanted to print this page out, we're going to really have issues reading the white on yellow because there's just not enough color contrast for it to be easily legible. And it's pretty easy to test for as well. There's a ton of free color contrast checkers tools online. You can easily just kind of compare one color to another, and it'll tell you essentially whether it's considered accessible or not, and to what standard. And also designers as well. If there's any designers there, they can very easily get plugins for tools like Photoshop or Figma or whatever they might be using for design work. That will kind of help them manage that color contrast and make sure they're doing it in an accessible way. Another kind of this is a good example of text contrast issues that I've seen quite a lot. So a lot of websites will have an image and have some white text over the top because it's cool and it's trendy, and we see it quite often. But it can cause a ton of issues, right? So if you think about this image, how many colors this this text is overlaid over. So, are we going to kind of color contrast check it against the kind of the pink of this lady's forehead, or the blue of the background? We're going to have to test thousands of colors, probably different shades and different tones, and that's just not realistic. It's just not going to happen. So your best bet in this scenario is to very significantly reduce the brightness of the image in the background, or just quite simply just not use text over images like this at all. So that's sufficient text contrast. I want to just quickly kind of a little bit of a sidebar, talk about something that's very similar, and that's just around color in general. So I've got a screenshot here of Trello. You've probably seen or used Trello before, but it's essentially a Kanban style project management tool, right? And this is just a sample project, just to demonstrate, but there's a bunch of different colored tags, right, that you can tag each of these tags, these tasks as. So that makes it very easy to kind of look at and kind of go, oh, okay, red tags, that's for my priority tasks, or green tags are for, my admin tasks. The problem is, if you can imagine that you saw this screenshot like this. So visual impairments like color blindness, they're way more common than you'd think. And if you rely purely on color, then you could be giving your users this kind of experience. Now, obviously, this is a pretty serious case of color blindness, being unable to see any color at all. But even colors that are very similar, red green color blindness is very, very common, and so having those sort of colors side by side can cause a lot of issues. So right now it's pretty much impossible in this scenario, this kind of black and white image, to tell which tag is which. So a really interesting way that Trello get around this, and the reason why I've picked Trello for this example is because you can actually click on the tag and it will display the name of the tag, right? So it doesn't just rely on color for it to be usable. Instead, there is an alternative. And that's the important message here is to always have that plan B when it comes to color, instead of always just relying on color alone. You can see this when it comes to graphs and charts as well. So just like that Trello example, you can instead use different things like patterns, for example, on different chart segments, so that you're not just relying on color alone to differentiate. Of course, you'll also want super clear labels so it can be read by a screen reader, all of that sort of stuff. But I don't want to go too into graphs and charts right now. But yeah, that's a bit of a sidebar on color. So that's our top 5 list. We're going to go ahead and move on to WCAG 2.2 in a moment. But before we do, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the government design services. This is a really super great cheat tool for getting a really consistent, accessible website. If you're building a new site, or if your site is in complete shambles and it needs a complete refresh, it's worth taking a look at this. It can really help you cut a lot of corners to make a really good, accessible website. And they've even got a form builder tool as well for accessible forms, and this is really, really good, right? Forms are very difficult, can be quite tough to get to be accessible. So I'd definitely check this one out if you're worried about your forms as well. It's super handy. So time for the big one, WCAG 2.2. It's very easy to think of WCAG 2.2 like this. This is a screenshot of Darth Vader marching through the Death Star. So it can be quite scary. This thing is going to, it's heading our way. But instead of thinking it like this, we should be seeing WCAG 2.2 as more like this. This is a field of lovely, cute little puppies that are all happy. And that's because WCAG 2.2 is a good thing, and it should make us happy. It is about making the web better for everybody. That's the point of it. So when's it coming? Well, it was supposed to be in November 2020. That passed. Then it was supposed to be June 2021, then summer 2022, then September 2022. Now it's December 2022. So a nice Christmas gift for us all, I suppose. My colleague Jess, she's already done a webinar with our partners over at Soccer Team about everything that we know is coming in WCAG 2.2. So you can go ahead and check that out if you want everything to be super in depth. But in this webinar, we're just going to speak about some of the big ones, as well as some of the recent changes that have taken place since then as well. And although there are obviously AAA variations, we're just going to be looking at the AA success criterion in this webinar. So first up, let's look at accessible authentication. I'm not a big fan of the names of WCAG. Honestly, they're all very long and boring to read and confusing. In a very simple way, all this is about passwordless logins, alternative ways of logging into accounts and services. So the National Cybersecurity Centre has a blog post which says, let them paste passwords because it doesn't make your site any less secure. And that's just one of these new requirements, is allowing users to actually paste into password fields. If you think about using things, I certainly do this. I have a lot of accounts. I use a kind of like a password tool that saves all my password in one place. And so normally it will auto populate a lot of my accounts for me, whereas that becomes completely redundant if I can't paste into form fields. These requirements, they also include providing alternatives to cognitive function tests. So these tests are things like memorizing separate usernames and passwords, transcribing codes from one device to another, or calculations like 5 times 7 equals, and other kind of puzzles and recaptures with pictures, all of that sort of stuff. And all of these can and do produce cognitive burdens. And as a side note, name, email address, and phone number, that they're all fine. You can expect people to remember these because they're just basic personal information. Here's a screenshot of eBay, which is almost there. I can click a button that says, need help signing in, and I can try to log in without a password. However, it only offers to text me a code, and I'm trying to log in on my desktop machine. I'm not on a mobile device. So I have to grab my phone, open it up, and then type in the 6-digit code from my mobile onto my desktop. I'm sure you've probably experienced a similar sort of thing, but there's just no workaround for it. And this is an example of transcription. We're taking content from one device and have to then retype it into another, and it's bad. Imagine if you were someone that suffered with kind of motor control, just the effort that you need to go through to move between different devices is going to be a big struggle. It works a little bit better if you are on mobile originally. So I'm sure you've experienced it before, where you've received a text message code whilst you're trying to log into something on your phone. Your phone picks up that it's got a login code and it automatically populates it for you in one click. That's great. There's no transcription there. But if you're on a desktop device and it has to text you, it's a bit of an issue. We see that with the likes of PayPal here. It does that exact thing, 6-digit code that needs to be transcribed. And Steam is a bit of a nightmare as well. Steam doesn't even use numbers. They use letters too. So you can't even have like a nice keypad layout with just showing numbers. Instead, it has to show everything. And, even worse than that, it doesn't allow you to copy and paste the code into it, which is just a pain. This is a really interesting one. This is the Barclays banking app. And while you can't ask people to remember a lot of things, you can give them their own chosen content. So this app lets you set a phrase that only you would recognize, right? And it warns you that if you don't see the phrase on the login screen, then it might not be their actual app, which is pretty cool. It's a really interesting way of, letting people set their own content. It's not all sunshine and rainbows for the Barclays though. On the left, we've got a Barclays text message here, and it cuts off after saying your secure OTP is 10, and then it cuts off there, which is like, great. Now I need to open up the text message and then remember the code and go back to the other app and all of that sort of stuff. And I know this sounds a little bit petty, but for users with disabilities, this can be an absolute chore for them compared to, a lot of the easier processes that we're going to look at in a moment. So to add insult to injury as well, you can't see the keyboard on this screenshot, but Barclays also shows the standard QWERTY keyboard instead of a keypad with just numbers, even though they only use numbers. On the other hand, Amex did a similar sort of thing, but they text through saying American Express one-time password 524074. And that automatically pulled through above the keyboard, which was just a numerical keyboard, which is great. And it pulled through above it, and it just was one of those one-tap things, so you don't need to transcribe anything. But obviously, of course, that allows you, it means that you need to be on a mobile device in the first instance. One of the best answers that we've seen to this, and obviously it's all kind of, being worked on at the moment. There's still kind of new stuff coming up here and there. But one of the best answers that we've seen to this is the magic link. So essentially, if I'm trying to log in somewhere and I click on the I need help logging in button, it'll email me a magic link, right? And this link, I can click on it and it will log me in instantly. End of, easy peasy. So the only thing that I need to remember is how to access my email. And remember, that's considered personal information. You can expect people to be able to remember their email. So to summarize, just ensure that there's no transcription, make it as easy as possible for people to be able to log in. And of course, make it so that people can copy and paste passwords into the password field as well. Target size. So this is the next one that we're going to talk about. And this one is about making things easy to tap on mobile or click with a mouse. So there's a number of things going on here. Starting on the second one down, we can see how 24 CSS pixels for each icon is acceptable. That's big enough to be able to be considered accessible, to be able to tap on easily. And you can also do this in a slightly different way in the example below that, where we've got icons that are 20 pixels square, but they have 4 pixel gaps between them. That adds up to 24, right? Just like the example above when the icons were 24 by 24 pixels. So it's 24 is the magic golden number, right? We're going to be saying that a lot. The last one here is 20 pixels without the spacing, and that's not enough because it's less than 24 pixels. Hope that makes sense. Thinking about that 24 pixels rule, you can make the icons much smaller than that, but the gaps around them then do have to compensate. So in this example here, we've got icons which are 10 pixels by 10 pixels square. But in order for it to be considered accessible, we need to add in an extra 14 pixels to the left, to the bottom, to the left, to the right, all around it, to add that up to 24 pixels total spacing to be considered accessible. But you'll notice that because of this, we're actually taking up far more screen real estate than we would if we just kept the icons at 24 pixels square. So just one thing to kind of bear in mind, obviously there is a balancing act to be done there. Again, spacing matters. This is showing the 24 pixels rule again, but this time using line height. We've got a list of 4 links on the right-hand side there that are less than 24 pixels spacing between the line height, and that would be considered a fail, right? Whereas the one on the right has more than 24 pixels, so it's considered a pass. And looking at this objectively, I think that the one on the left just looks better anyway. And we see that again here, this time in a drop-down menu using cell padding. And it makes such a big difference. Those extra 4 pixels, it doesn't sound like it's going to make a big difference, but it really, really does. You can really imagine this being way, way easier to tap on if you're on like a mobile device. Next up, we've got focus appearance, and this is where we think back to the focus states that I spoke about a little bit earlier on. And this aims to this rule here aims to define the minimum rules for what a focus state should be. So here's some examples of focus states that would pass the requirements as the draft version of WCAG 2.2 requires. Unfortunately, I still don't think that it's good enough, right? I don't think that I'm being super picky here. When these focus states are zoomed in at this size, they look kind of good. They look okay. Here's another example, right? We've got 5 stars here, and there's a 1 pixel border around the edge of the middle star to say that it's focused in on. And by WCAG 2.2, that means that this is all good. And that's kind of fine as long as we can see it at this size. Whereas in reality, we're probably not going to see the stars at this size, right? In the context of a website, they're probably going to be more like a quarter of the size. And a really good way to very easily and quickly test if your focus states are standing out enough is to simply squint. So if you go ahead and do that for me now, just simply squint and look at these stars and tell me which star has the focus state. How many stars can you see? Because for me personally, maybe I've just got bad eyes, but the 2 stars on the right-hand side, they completely disappear, and the focus state is practically impossible to perceive. So squinting is a really good way to simulate that kind of idea of low vision and pick up on some of those issues. So you can see what I'm getting at here and why I don't think that this is good enough when it comes to focus states. These are screenshots here from our Don't Be Afraid of Keyboard Navigation video. And the point that the video is trying to make is that focus state should be bright. It should be contrasting. It's not about being pretty. It's about being functional. Remember that no one's going to see your focus states if they don't need them. As in the quick demonstration, I want you all to just close your eyes for a second. Don't worry, I'm not going to shout boo and scare you. But when you open your eyes, you're going to see a web page, and I want you to see how fast you can find where the focus state is on the page. Right? Okay, so keep them closed and now open them. Where are we on the page? Yeah, I don't want to speak for you, but I think most of us can see where we are super quickly, thanks to the very vibrant and bold focus state. And this is why it matters, right? If you get distracted, if the phone rings, if the doorbell goes, how do you know where you are? On top of that, let's test it out and do the squint test one more time, right? If we squint, it's still very easy to see where this focus state is, even at this size. It's super clear. It doesn't need to be hard. This is what the minimum should be. So just kind of bear that in mind. It's not about adding little tiny lines or drop shadows to make it look pretty. It's about making it easier for the people who really need it. Unfortunately, focus appearance, what we've just spoken about, this whole section in WCAG 2.2 has recently been updated to be at risk, which means that it could be dropped, which is pretty unfortunate, especially considering that we don't think their idea of what should pass is good enough. So we'll just have to wait and see what makes it into the final published version of WCAG 2.2. But yeah, WCAG's pretty 2.2 right now is pretty volatile. They're still changing things. There is another WCAG success criterion called focus visible. This is quite similar to focus appearance. So focus appearance is about looking to set the minimum requirements for how a focus state should look. Whereas focus visible is about requiring that the focus state exists in the first place. So you can see why they're quite similar and why they can get mixed up. And focus visible in WCAG 2.2 has been moved from level AA to A, which means that it's pretty much moved from a should have to a must have. So if the delayed release, continuous delayed release of WCAG 2.2 didn't make this super obvious, there are a lot of changes that have happened and are still happening, and there's a lot of stuff that could change before its release, and that's a really big part of why at Silktide we're only going to be testing for WCAG 2.2 once it's kind of done and it's confirmed and it's kind of gone gold, because right now it's just way too volatile, so it's kind of pointless kind of testing for it in terms of the current standards. So what does it matter? Well, the other thing to consider is, well, when WCAG 2.2 releases, it's probably not going to be required by law, at least not right away. It probably will happen quite soon. But why does it matter now? Well, I think it's very important to get ahead of the curve, to really prepare for it now, save yourself that mad dash, that mad rush when it finally arrives. And also just remember that these guidelines are here for a reason. They're not just a checklist for you to tick off, but it is about making your website a better experience for everybody. And that's a super key point to remember. So before we wrap up, I want to kind of know more about what you are currently using to improve your website accessibility, if you're using anything at all. So we've got a quick poll here that I am just going to set off. So if you can answer that, if you can, that'd be great. And if you do have any questions as well, feel free to drop them into the Q&A bit of Zoom. We'll get to them in just a minute. This is quite interesting. A lot of people are using free tools. A lot of people are doing manual testing. That sounds like fun. An agency or web hosting company. Not many people are using nothing at all, which is quite interesting. Great. Okay, well, I'm gonna end the poll there, just so I'm not taking up a load more time. Interesting stuff. Right, so as an extra, we've got a bunch of quirky videos. I've kind of shown you some screenshots from some of our videos that we've got. They're pretty fun, they're quite quick, and they're really, really helpful to help understand all of the sort of stuff that we've been through today, and a lot of other topics and that sort of stuff as well. You can find them on youtube.com/Silktide, so go ahead and check those out. And also, like I mentioned earlier, you can download our free Chrome plugin if you want to test how a screen reader kind of works and reads through parts of your site. It's got a bit of other simulation tools in it as well that you can kind of play around with in different ways. So feel free to check that out. I also want to give you a brief understanding of the Silktide platform, what it is and what it can do before I move on to the Q&A. So I mentioned earlier about the Silktide index, which is where we've got all of this data for NHS websites from. And we get that data by running these websites through the Silktide platform. So what it does, it will crawl your site, it will find accessibility issues, but also issues with marketing, content, user experience, and it just makes it way easier for you to manage the growth of your whole web estate. We know that when it comes to WCAG, it can be quite daunting, and so the Silktide platform automates a lot of WCAG criteria to really take the load off of you and your teams and just make it much easier to manage. Using the platform also makes it a lot easier and quicker to find those accessibility issues across your site and also solve them. So instead of finding every single issue manually, one page at a time, if you're using free tools, perhaps, you can very easily find all of those accessibility issues super fast across your whole website, and then kind of learn how to fix them and be educated in that regard as well. So using Silktide, it's not just a one-off report, it is a continuous audit of your website. So when you add in new content or when you make those changes, the report will update and it will help you track that web accessibility progress over time. So if you do want to hand tackling the web accessibility challenges across your sites, Dave will be reaching out to you after this session over email to see if you'd like a hands-on demo. And also he'll be, of course, sharing the recording of this session and the slides as well, so you can access all of those links if you wanted to. If you can't wait until then and you want to get a demo of Silktide straight away, you can just visit us at silktide.com and easily request a demo there. So that about wraps up our session for today. I really hope that it's been useful for you. I really hope that you've got some good takeaways. And if you enjoyed the session, let me know, or if there's anything else that you wanted to see more of, do let me know. But that's enough of my voice for now. Please feel free to ask us any questions. I've got my colleague and accessibility expert, Jess, here to answer some questions too. So yeah, feel free to drop some questions into the Q&A. Let's see what we've got. Right. Are you there, Jess?
Hi, everyone.
There she is. Great. Okay. Can you see those questions, Jess?
Right. So our first question is from Nina. It says, is it possible for us to receive the stats that you're talking about regarding the accessibility of NHS pages? For example, the 86% of NHS sites have contrast issues. This would be great to back up user research. How can we get these results for specific services? Often when discussing accessibility, development teams state that a site has passed accessibility testing that has been done, but clearly there are areas of improvement that have been missed. Yeah, feel you on that one. This is now an Adam task. We have a lot of this data because we're testing all of them. If there are specific things you're interested in, we should be able to put something together to give you an idea of kind of the bigger scope of what's going on. And for what it's worth, in probably January, February, I don't know, somewhere in there, we'll be doing this kind of the State of the Union. Yeah, I know, I'm American. For council websites again with Socketim, where we go through the entire public sector. We ended up focusing a lot on council sites this year in February because they'd shown so much progress that we really kind of wanted to highlight what was going on there. But the reality is we kind of look at everything for the past 12 months and kind of bundle it all together into here's your top issues and the kind of percentages we're talking about. So I think the best thing I would say here is that if there's something you want to know about or specific things like I know in February, the PDFs for NHS websites was 99% were not accessible. So those are the kind of stats you probably need to explain what needs to be done. You can let me know if you need more information. Cody asked, what next steps do you recommend while we wait for WCAG 2.2? That is a really good question. Right. The thing I'm going to say here is that you want to do everything you can, right? Focus states are something any designer can set in CSS, right? That's a big deal. And it's the kind of thing where some of these are surprisingly like quick wins. Fixing your focus states, unless your website's really wild, should be a relatively simple process, right? You're going to have to look at it and make sure that you don't have, like, we had this happen. I'll give you an example. We have call to actions that are sometimes in like a different kind of frame than other sections of the page, which means that we actually have to be aware because the focus state that we need around, say, that call to action button may be very different because of the colors involved than the ones we use for, say, everything across the top navigation. It is possible that you can get a single color that will work with all of it, but in my opinion, you need to take a look, because if you have designers who like to make things all different and pretty, which most of us do, you're gonna have to be on them to be like, you need to be considering this. And that's one of the main things I'm hoping you take away from this is awareness. Right? When you know that your focus states matter, you can be thinking about that when you're designing. When you know that the color contrast matters, or you know that you want to put text over an image, You know, you can think about things like scrims. You can put like a little thing behind the text that kind of acts like shading almost. You've probably seen it. I didn't know what it was called either. I had to do a bunch of Googling to figure that one out. But like that darker kind of bar that goes behind the text so that you get better contrast, it's called a scrim. But this is what I mean when you become aware of the things that need to be done, and you kind of, I think they call it shifting to the left, right? Where like you do it earlier in the process rather than at the end. Yeah, the whole thing's just so much better and so much smoother. Advice for making websites more visually appealing and stimulating. As we make the website more accessible, it becomes more text heavy and the pages are longer. That can definitely happen. It doesn't have to be ugly, right? The only thing that can be ugly is your focus states. I'll say that until the cows come home. Focus states probably need to be ugly, right? It's simpler when you stop trying to make them pretty. You can still have a visually appealing website. Apple's website is one of the best examples. Their website is always stunning, and it is extremely accessible because they start from the position of like, this has to be accessible to everyone. And then they just push the envelope for what you can do within that space. When you say it's more text heavy and the pages are longer, I have a lot of questions. Is it because you don't feel like you can use as many images? Is it like there's got to be something going on there? I'll give you an example. We like to put videos into our web pages, and we include transcripts, right? But we hide them, so they're like something you have to click to expand. So it's still there, and it's totally accessible to people who need it, but it's not hogging up a bunch of space on the page necessarily for anyone who's a visual user. We might need to talk about that more, like with more examples. I could give you a kind of more pertinent advice rather than like a general thing. Right. Brian, with the ARIA example, you continue the sentence from the words of the link. Is that how it's normally done rather than starting the sentence afresh? Oh, right. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this, right? It's up to you. The way that we did it with the Silktide blog is that it actually reads the read more, and then it reads the title of the blog post, right? So it skips over it the first time. It's actually hidden text. So it doesn't get read out. The blurb about what the blog post is gets read out, and then it says link, read more about whatever the title was. It's really cool. Turns out wasn't that hard. But I was so impressed because I didn't know they'd done it, and I was literally reading the blog page going, oh, I hate my life, right? With a screen reader, and just like, wait, what? Because I was like, did that just happen? That was awesome. And I was like, I didn't know we could do that. What you want to care about is what the experience ends up being like, right? That can be different for every website, right? The objective is to make sure that you give the user the information they need so that they have the same information that someone who's a visual user has. But how you go about it and what choices you make, there's actually a lot of options. Right. For links on Hover, is the best accessibility solution just have an underline? Oh, right. Hover generally doesn't come into play when we are talking about hover states. It just doesn't. Hover states are for visual users. That's all they are, right? They're for, well, probably most of us, right? Here's the thing. You need to know that when we were talking about color and how like you can't only use color, that applies to links, right? So when we talk about graphs and things and say you need patterns or something to discern them that isn't color, right? The same thing happens here. If you don't have enough like clear change, right? Now, this is where things get a bit weird because WCAG is funky, but suffice to say, it is possible with the correct color choices, and this is very limited, to set it up that as long as your font is bold or something that makes it visually different and is a different color and maintains a 3:1 contrast ratio with the background color and the adjacent text. Yeah, all of that, and you can avoid underlining your links, right? Generally speaking, the simpler solution really is underline all of your links. Again, this is a relatively simple change in your CSS that your designer should be able to take care of, right? But that's what it comes down to, is that your links need to be underlined all the time. It's the simplest and quickest solution to not just using color, right? When you think about people who can't see red, green, which, as Adam pointed out, is exceedingly common, something like 1 in 10. But further down the line, there are blue, yellow color blindness, and there is full no color. And when you think of text where the only difference is color, there isn't anything else to let you know it's a link. It doesn't matter if you hover over it that it suddenly gets underlined. What matters is that it's underlined all the time so that you can see at a glance that is the link in the text. Does that make sense? Emma says, we have literally hundreds of PDFs on our website. I bet. For patient information leaflets for every service and department. Maybe you have thousands. How would you suggest managing this to improve our overall web accessibility? You need software. The problem here is a simple one. If a PDF was created before September 2018, and you're in the UK, right? Can't stress the in the UK enough. It is not currently in use, right? So like it's archived. You don't have to do anything to it. You can leave it however it was. However, anything that is being used by the public, and also anything that was created after September 2018, and that doesn't matter if it was archived or not, if it's still available on the website, this is something you should think about, because anything you can get rid of might be worth doing. There's a surprising amount of time and human hours that go into remediating PDFs, right? So the thing I would say to you is this. Using software like, say, Danya, which is really popular with the councils, for example, it allows you to make sure, if you're using Office to create them, this is key, that everything you make that's new will be as accessible as it can be, right? Which kind of stops the bleeding, because every time you make a PDF right now, if you're not making it as accessible as possible at the outset, you're just adding to this backlog of PDFs that someone has to come in and fix, right? And trust me, remediation is a million times worse than doing it right the first time. So in your case, especially with a shockingly large number of them, you definitely want to look at something that is going to speed this up, because it's a huge undertaking. And like I said, one of the biggest things is to draw a line and say, from here on out, we don't make inaccessible PDFs. The only ones we make are okay, so that we don't add to the backlog of work. But it is, unfortunately, a lengthy process. It's not going to be fun for somebody, or multiple somebodies. Emmer says, how do we make large complex PDFs like annual reports more accessible? Right? They include lots of financial tables. I knew tables was coming. Performance tables, and we simply wouldn't be able to put all of this onto a web page. Why not? I mean, I don't mean to be painful. Well, maybe I'm painfully stupid, but my first question is, why not, right? You've made a PDF, right? What did you build it in is my first question, because you can make accessible Word documents. That's part of the reason I say things like use Danya, because you can get a more accessible PDF, but you can actually get an accessible Word document out of it, right? So that's the idea of alternative formats is often a good idea. The government, I believe, recommends ODF, which is the open document format. The main difference being that thing Adam mentioned called reflow, where when you zoom in, it just like resizes everything and changes the layout. It supports that. So there are options here. Maybe you don't want to make it a web page. Maybe you want to find a different accessible format like Word. But HTML is, honestly, tables in HTML are really easy. So getting your tables to be awesome in a PDF, hard. It is literally one of the most time-consuming things. It can take as much as 20 minutes for a single table. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm not kidding. It's hard. It's like making a table, the same thing in HTML is like, it takes me 5 minutes, right? So like there's pros and cons here. Oh, sorry, that was Ember. No, we totally didn't cover this. So don't worry, Ember, that was not covered. Because the reality is PDFs exist for a reason. And the reason is a simple one. Designers like them, right? When you make a PDF, you know exactly what it's going to look like on every device. It doesn't matter where you open it, it's the same. And that is a huge boon, but it's also a really big problem. Yeah, like, but it comes up a lot that like we have big PDFs, we have lots of things in them, but you know, honestly, the tables are such a killer anyway. Like making them accessible is hard inside a PDF. It's easier outside of the PDF dynamic. So if it isn't an issue of we need PDFs for, you know, insert reason, you know, then potentially there's another document format, or, you know, as weird as it might sound and as awful as it might be, you know, doing it as an HTML page might be better. The reason I mention this is because if it's a huge document, you're probably thinking it's going to be the longest scrolling page of doom, right? You can paginate inside HTML and it will be fine. You can have a table of contents just like you should in any really long PDF anyway, right? Where like you can click on something and it'll take you to that section of it. You know, like all of that functionality is still available. If anything, it's easier to do those kind of things in an HTML page than it is to do it in a PDF. Does that help?
Yeah, hopefully. Sounds good to me. Well, you know, we are kind of running over by 3 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and
sorry.
No, that's okay. No, it's valuable stuff, Jess. Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for answering those questions, Jess. And if anyone's got any more questions, do feel free to just let us know, and we'll get back to you. But yeah, we'll call it a day there. Thank you so much for coming along today, and I do hope that you have a very good rest of the day.
Thanks,
Take care,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you, Emma.